Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Pretty great.
Let's set this thing up. There we go. It's a square. How do I pronounce your last name?
It's Molly, like the first name.
Oh, Emily Molli.
Yep.
Excellent. I'm just going to introduce you then and we can start chatting.
Cool.
This is Emily Molli. She is a journalist in Brooklyn.
Actually, we're in the New York metro area. I'm not going to say specifically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Somewhere on a big island out there with a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly.
And you run, or you're a partner in Subverse Videos?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
So subverse.net, and then the YouTube channel is Subverse. Actually, I think we just changed it to Subverse now.
Subverse. And you guys were out in Olympia like 3 weeks ago, I think. Maybe 2.
About.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you guys interviewed Brett Weinstein, and then you actually did a mini documentary that you just released a couple days ago.
Yeah, that's right. We also did a podcast for the Culture War podcast, which is one that Tim and I do together with both Brett and his wife, Heather Hying.
Is that on Tim's channel, or is that like a separate channel again?
Yeah, so that's on Tim's channel, but it's also on iTunes. So we do at least an hour long each week, and the video goes up on YouTube on Tim's channel, which is Timcast, and then the audio goes up on iTunes.
All right. And when did you start getting into journalism, and what attracted you to that?
Well, it actually kind of fell into my lap. I think it was about 3.5 years ago at this point, with... I don't know if you remember Ferguson at all in Missouri when Michael Brown was shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was actually going to school at the time for animation and filmmaking, and a friend of mine who works, at the time he was working for a Chinese wire service, told me his staff videographer was too scared to go, and so he needed somebody who knows how to work a camera. And that's where I came in, and I was like, go into a riot zone? Absolutely. This is like breaking national news. I'd be happy to. So yeah, I dropped everything I was doing. I was working a job in technology at the time, putting software onto hardware, and I was like, hey, is it cool if I take off early? There's something interesting going down, and I really want to cover it. And they're like, yeah, you might lose your job for it, but, do what you got to do. And I was like, okay, that's fine by me. Like, I really didn't like the job I was in at the time. And, so I went to Ferguson, and stuff got pretty crazy there. And that was the first time that I, actually saw firsthand how dishonest the mainstream media was being about what was happening there. And I remember because there was lots of tear gas and other... it was just crazy out there. And I think it was as Don Lemon at one point said that there was no tear gas happening. And
so
I was just
lie.
I was blown away by that. And at one point, I can't remember if this was the first round of Ferguson or the second round, but a Huffington Post journalist, Ryan Riley, tweeted out a picture of him holding some orange earplugs in his hand and tweeting out, I think they're shooting rubber bullets. And I was just like, oh my God, somebody who's literally paid to be doing this job is putting out false information. And then I was like, okay, so actually I guess I'm better at this than most people are. So I kind of caught the bug, just being out on the front lines and seeing things for myself and being able to tweet about it, and people finding more reliable information firsthand from tweets than from watching CNN.
Okay. So you were doing camera, but you were also just reporting it directly onto the web.
So I was doing camera work for a company, and then I was just tweeting my experience as I was going, which actually ended up getting obviously what I was shooting was being broadcast to millions of people internationally, but I didn't really realize the power of I don't want to call it citizen journalism, because at the time I was shooting for someone, but that was really my first foray into realizing how much scope being on the ground and just tweeting about something has.
Yeah, you have scope, but you also can kind of shape the narrative just as much as the Huffington Post or the mainstream media is doing.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was a really interesting dynamic for me to see like where some of these journalists were going wrong. Like, so the big difference, especially in Ferguson, was mainstream media had a pen. They had a side of the road that they had to stick to, and they weren't allowed to step off of it. Otherwise, they were arrested and taken away. So most of the media would stay in that area, and you'd have all these freelancers and independent people going out with the protesters and covering it from the front lines of the protests. Okay. So obviously, the people who are in the front lines are going to see a different story than what the mainstream media in the media pen are seeing.
Wow. And so, I mean, you're taking kind of your life in your hands, or you're taking the story into your hands in a way. You're really embedding yourself into what's going on. But why would we even have a mainstream media at this point if they're already always filtered?
You know, that's a good question, because you see more and more people turning to alternative sources of media, especially with the internet age. People still obviously watch TV and watch CNN. Yeah. I think we're already seeing things turn over to digital. You know, you have them trying to keep up with online streaming. Yeah. Of their like, you have CNN Go and all of this other online stuff, but I think we're seeing less and less of a need for it, just through social media and through independent people putting up content, and then people can decide for themselves what they think is true and what has integrity and what is worth listening to and looking at.
But at the same time, now we have these content hosting sites like YouTube. Mm-hmm. Now they're trying to get in the game of deciding what can be seen or not. And yeah. It's a big black box. What do you think about that? And are you worried about that going forward? Or
well, it's interesting because I was for the last few hours I was watching a panel that Tim was actually speaking on, hosted by Minds.com, which you've probably heard of. I'm not sure if anyone else is familiar with it, but their whole aim is a censorship-free social media platform for videos, for pretty much anything you can do on other social media platforms. But they really stress the anti-censorship thing, except for obviously other than things that are like illegal. But yeah, especially with YouTube deciding almost arbitrarily what should be seen, even if it doesn't necessarily go against community guidelines. I think we are going to see other platforms emerging to fill the gap, where people need to people care about content that isn't going to be whittled down into what they want you to see.
Do you think it's the responsibility of content creators then to inspire content consumers to go to other platforms? And like, where do you see your responsibility in like helping the eye go to another platform?
Yeah, like so I mean, I think everyone should, and I know not everyone has the time for this because not everyone works in news, but everyone should be gathering their information from a large like variety of sources. I think there is a place for mainstream media, but I think when you have independent creators pushing content that isn't necessarily, well, so I'll say this. There's a place for mainstream media. There's obvious spin to each, you can go to any publication, whether it's the New York Times, Fox News, Breitbart, and you can see what they're spinning. Yeah. There's this great tool now called their website called The Knife Media, which I think they're doing a really great thing with stripping the bias out of news stories and just putting out the raw facts. And that's really exciting to me because you see what kind of emotionally charged language they use, and you see individual slants. And basically when it comes down to it, nobody's going to want to read a totally monotonous article. Yeah. Because, that's not going to engage a lot of people. But reading the facts and then going and seeing like how the different publications will interpret it or analyze it, I think it's important to see all of the sides of it so people can make up their own mind. And a lot of the times mainstream media has a very, I don't want to say it's all the same view, but
it's pretty...
it is a lot of the mainstream media is very lefty,
Yeah.
and there needs to be kind of an answer to that somewhere, and you see that with alternative media coming up with,
And
you know, it's fractured in a way still, but I think the best solution to that is just having so many different sources that you look at.
Do you think the fracturedness is what allows it to be free in a way, like that it's not yet stable? And
I think that's great. I think you're never going to have total objectivity especially from mainstream media. So I think it's like having it's like diversity, you know, like you can have viewpoint diversity, and I feel like that's the best way to reach people, for people to figure out, like, you have people who have their go-to sites or newspapers, but kind of exposing yourself to more viewpoints is really what's going to get you the most informed about a topic.
Yeah. And I guess, like, it's kind of, the onus is on the individual then to be able to harmonize different viewpoints, or like find different viewpoints that you can kind of trust, but then allow these different viewpoints to kind of have a discussion in your head. Isn't there kind of a competency that we kind of need now?
Yeah. And, I think part of it is we're almost like passive consumers now. And I think what social media does right is making people have conversations. Obviously, you have a lot of people who will just go on Twitter and be like, "You're wrong," and then call you a bunch of names, and that's not really productive. But being able to argue, like, so for example, my dad, who's a big Wall Street Journal fan, he'll send me articles from time to time, and I have this thing where I'll dissect an article and be like, well, this is where they get this wrong, and this, they should have looked into this more, and this is, you can see they're trying to make you think that this is right, but there's so many other things you can look into, and I feel like you almost need to I don't want to say annotate as you read, because it's not like it's some kind of literature course, but really pay attention to the language that they're using. And where they're coming from.
I'm wondering, so you did this documentary kind of about 40 minutes on Evergreen. And you spent some time with that protester footage then.
Oh, yeah.
So this is a group of people, kind of spontaneously, more or less, that kind of tried to be their own press. And what are your thoughts as a journalist, like watching the footage and seeing what they did? And I mean, maybe your critiques and then your kind of your reading of that.
Well, I mean, for one thing, we have to remember these are students.
Yeah.
So the majority of them are, like 17, 18, 19 years old. I think they might need more critical thinking classes at that school, for
Why
one
do you
thing.
say that?
I mean, obviously there's so much to be said for the psychological aspect of it. There's so much mob mentality happening there. Like, all it really takes is for I don't know, whatever mass capacity would be for other people to be like, well, damn, if I don't get involved in this, they're going to see me as, racist or, it was kind of, it was like a trip. It was like a social, it seems like a social experiment. And I think Brett says something like that in the interview, where they're letting this anarchist experiment happen. And I'm sure for George Bridges, who's a sociologist, it must have been fascinating for him to watch, even if he didn't mean to be at the wrong end of this.
Yeah, I wonder if he's done some analysis from his discipline.
But damn, yeah, like watching the cognitive dissonance of a lot of these students. Well, first of all, like they were fed a narrative that sorry about that, my cat just jumped up on. They're fed this narrative it's obviously very one-sided, and I think that's why the faculty viewpoint is so important, especially like covering that in the documentary, which a lot of the articles written about the Evergreen situation didn't go really in depth about the faculty discussions before this that were happening over equity. And I think that's such a crucial part of the story too, because what it comes down to is you had a professor feeding some students what to think about Brett's email about the day of absence. and they acted on that, and it snowballed.
Yeah.
And it became about something that it never really should have been about. You know, there's so much to unpack with that, and it stinks. Like, I wanted to do something much, much longer because there is so much to unpack from this situation, especially in everything leading up to it. But there's just so many emails to go through, and there's so many interviews you would want to have, and it's
Did you try reaching out to other people other than Brett, like the staff or the faculty at Evergreen?
You know, I had made a list of people that I wanted to talk to, and then when I started, so Tim and I are both producing this, and we have limited funding, and so I made this list of, I actually still have like a bunch of my notes of people I wanted to talk to, and like other things that I wanted to bring up, and he was like, we're not gonna have time for that. And at that point it was, we were planning on releasing this the day that Weinstein and Hying were having a panel at PSU.
Yeah.
And so it comes down to like news cycle at that point, which
Absolutely.
You know, I wish we had the time to do more, because I have so many questions for so many people.
Interesting. I'd like to see those questions at some point.
Well, I mean, the most interesting, I thought, like, obviously we know what the professors who kind of propelled this narrative against Weinstein have to say about it, but the ones who supported him privately, and then eventually I think a couple came out publicly, those are the ones that I wanted to talk to. And I understand the situation of they didn't want to be part of a witch hunt. Like, I get that it would have been their head on the chopping block next after Brett. But you know, those are the kind of stories I want to hear too. You know, like, why don't you feel like you can speak up? Is it because you fear for your job? You fear for your social standing among your peers, your colleagues?
Yeah.
You know, the fallout. So yeah, it's too bad, but
so
maybe.
Reviewing the Evergreen footage, like, this is some self-shot, like, front lines reporting. I mean, like, I know it's not reporting, but it's kind of like they're trying to report.
It's interesting documentarian kind of, like, even the kid Judas, right? Who was his name? The
main guy.
Yeah, the main documentarian.
Yeah.
Like, he would even say when he was filming people, this is for documentary purposes. You know.
Yeah.
And I loved that. Like, even though I think, you know, he's obviously not the most objective person to be documenting what's going on.
Yeah.
I think it's extremely valuable that he did.
Yeah.
Like, even if he didn't mean for it to kind of like blow up in their faces.
Yeah.
I'm so glad, like, you can see in the videos, like, a couple people recording, like multiple people recording at certain points.
There's tons of footage out there somewhere.
Yeah. And it's interesting that so much of it got taken down too. As soon as they realized, oh, okay, this might not help our narrative. But yeah, I feel like that's something that's really important about this story. Like, how much of it is, you know, people will watch that and put their own meaning into it. As this was happening, they thought they were doing the right thing. They thought they were doing a net positive. So,
well, there's two sides to this that I'd like your input on, or your take. One, like, with the young man who did most of the filming, like, there's no way that anybody could have been that close to the action without being a part of the action. Maybe not, but, like, within that kind of group, like, they're going so fast and so furious that, like, you have to be a part of it and accepting it, or else you're automatically the enemy. And as a reporter, so there's two questions for you that I'd like to ask. Like, how far do you embed yourself to be along, to be in that moment, and how do you keep yourself from completely merging with the mob, like when you're right up in the front?
That's a really good question, because I'm a smaller, like, freelance independent journalist. So when I do go, I don't want to say I'm embedding with these groups, but when I do place myself within them and have these conversations and talk about what they're doing, there's always this air of skepticism towards them, like whether or not I'm in on their cause and whatnot. Yeah. And so I try to stay as bare bones as possible when I'm talking about what why I'm there, and I just say I think this is an important topic, an important issue to cover. So when I cover a lot of like nationalist events and a lot of free speech rallies, a lot of the ones where Antifa and the other side start kind of going at it.
Yeah.
And that's always been interesting, just because I have friends who are Antifa, and I know they really don't like me covering the violence on their side. And at the same time, it's like, well, I'm covering both sides. You realize that, like, more of the stuff that I cover, like, you see, I mean, if you'd have to watch the videos, but you see who the instigators are in a lot of these, who are the ones who are provoking these. And I don't know, I think it's pretty easy to keep your own politics out of it. It's just a matter of getting accepted by the group in order for them to trust you.
Yeah.
And to actually let you tag along for a bit.
Yeah.
And it's getting harder and harder in this climate. Yeah. So the sort of far left friends that I have, and it used to not be like this, but they look at who I associate myself with, people who I work with, people who I hang out with, and they're like, oh, well, we don't know because we've seen you hanging out with that person. It's like, just because I'm talking to someone or standing with someone doesn't mean that I share their beliefs in any way.
Weird.
And then, yeah, and it goes the same way, but I've noticed that the other side, it's not as damning for you to be talking to other people. And I think it comes down to more of an individual basis, but collectivism in these events really make it difficult because so I guess, for example, I was in Washington, D.C. 2 weekends ago for Antifa were protesting a Mike Cernovich event in D.C. And I was staying outside with the Antifa the whole time. And so I'm following them around, and people are trying to block my camera. Like, that's normal for Antifa to be blocking. Like, all their faces are covered anyway. It's not like I'm going to be able to put anything out that people can identify them with.
Yeah.
I'm just covering what's happening because I think there's an extreme value in covering these things in case something does happen, in case another Charlottesville situation happens, and you can identify the people who are causing the violence. And so I'm just there, and I'm taking photos of them chanting and waving flags, and people are trying to block my camera, and it's like, fine, I know that's going to happen. I brush it off because it's really a non-issue. I just take it from another angle. I interviewed one of the leaders of this group, which was Lacey McCauley. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but she's kind of one of the more known central figures in organizing a lot of these anti-fascist events. Okay. And I could tell, I had been hanging out with the Antifa people all that evening, and I had been talking to some of them. They started warming up to me. Some offered me a cigarette. Somebody offered me a mask, and I was like, no. And like, I'm pressed. I can't be partaking in that. But and then at the end, kind of towards the middle of the night, I went and interviewed the leader, the organizer, and I could tell she was a little she was like super into it at first, because I asked, I pulled her aside and I said, can I interview you? I just have a couple questions. And then it kind of turned into a press pool, and because everyone saw that she was giving an interview and wanted a piece of that. So I'm asking her questions, and I can tell she's getting a little skeptical of me, because the questions are usually like, what's going on here tonight? Who are you protesting? Who's inside the event? And then I asked, what was my question? But it went against the grain of what the other questions were asking. And, I said, so at the last Cernovich event, somebody was attacked by a member of Antifa and had to go to the hospital. How do you stop events? How do you stop incidents like that from happening? And I could tell immediately her perspective me changed like that. It was like on a dime, and she kind of gives me this look and gives me kind of a little bit of a bullshit answer, I can't control what these people do. They're all individuals. It's not on me. And so I was like, okay, fair enough. And so after that, earlier in the night, she was totally cool with me, following her around and taking photos. And after that, she was giving me weird looks. I could tell I wasn't on her good side anymore. And so after that, they ended up leaving, and people were still at the Mike Cernovich event, and I was invited inside. And I was like, okay, this could be a little weird. But I went in and I did an interview with someone, and I noticed immediately like people were really welcoming to me and like really just wanted to know what I was about and what I was covering, and like and I could tell like they just didn't want to be misrepresented. And like because they had people outside the whole time calling them like Nazis and fascists and all of that stuff, they didn't want to add to the hostility. I mean, obviously they had people out there like screaming back at them and causing all kinds of trouble, but you also had people who were having discussions. And this was interesting because like there were other members of the media covering this protest, and I saw what they were tweeting, and they were omitting certain things, like the fact that Antifa and some of the members, some of the attendees of Mike Cernovich's event were saying we're actually having a calm discussion about their beliefs and their disagreements, and at the end they shook hands and they even hugged, and nobody was tweeting about that or taking photos of that. They were just doing all of like the people screaming at each other, like police having to hold people back, and yeah, I don't know, it's a weird tribal situation right now, and you know the most you can do is try to show that you're not there to represent one side or another, but you got to still ask the questions that are going to make them uncomfortable.
Yeah. I've seen Tim talk about this a little bit, but it seems like so anybody who's creating content needs to capture attention. So we need to kind of figure out what captures capture people's attention. Basically, the whole clickbait debate, I guess. It's so a hug is not going to get you a lot of views. It's not going to generate a lot of attention. Or
well, actually, in Gainesville, in I think it was November, maybe, there was Richard Spencer was having an event in Gainesville, and a bunch of people showed up to protest. And there was this hug that I captured on video. A black guy was hugging a neo-Nazi, like had the red suspenders, swastikas, and everything. And I had a video of that, and I tweeted it, and it went viral.
Oh, okay, well, there you go.
Yeah, for both good and bad reasons. Like, it was a sarcastic comment, and sarcasm does not go over well on the web. And I was like, is hug-a-Nazi the new punch-a-Nazi? And so I had tons of people retweeting it saying, oh, this is great, I love this. And other people have been like, oh, hell no, like, we're not hugging any Nazis. And I was like, okay, well, these are the questions that need to be asked, right?
Well, but I guess, do you find that you have like kind of a moral responsibility to calm the flames, or are you just trying to be as objective as possible? Like, what do you select to pay your attention to?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I feel like that's something that I'm still trying to navigate, and a lot of people are still trying to navigate. Because for me, I definitely try to err on the side of objectivity and hate using fair and balanced just because it has such a bad ring to it now. But I really try to do that just because I value it a lot in other people's coverage. Right. However, this is something where Tim and I kind of diverge, I guess. Tim knows what sells, and if you watch Tim's videos, you know that sometimes he'll title something a certain way, and it'll pose a question that's controversial that people are going to want to click on, and then it gets into like some good coverage of it. I think there's a lot of value in drawing people in to a discussion or a topic. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's tough. Like, even at the titling of this doc, I wanted to call it Evergreen Madness, Why Brett Weinstein Left. Yeah. And then he was like, that's never going to get any clicks on YouTube. And I was like, well, I don't want to make it clickbaity. Like, I don't want to do anything that's like, too on the edge. But so he was like, okay, we'll just call it Social Justice Activists took over a college and forced several professors out. And I was like, well, hang on a second. Like, I have a couple issues with that. I guess social justice activists, I don't know if it's just because of the climate, but that just felt like a really hot sort of term to use. Like, I was calling them student protesters the whole time. Okay. But sure, social justice activist does fit with what they were representing. So I was like, okay, that's fine. And then take over a school. effectively, that's what they did. They shut down Evergreen and forced several professors out. I was like, well, they didn't force them out. They created an environment that made two professors need to resign, and then they had to settle with another professor to leave. So that's three professors. What does several mean? Several means more than two. Okay, so that's... I still didn't like the word several, so I was like, okay, I'll put some professors. But yeah, it's still something I'm trying to navigate, and I find it like, especially if you want to be successful on YouTube, you definitely have to hit certain marks, and that's just SEO. That's how algorithms work.
Yeah. So I guess you guys are kind of like this company then is pretty new. It's like a year old or so.
Well, actually, it's formally it's only existed since February.
Oh, so 4 weeks.
But early February, I think maybe end of January is when I filed for the LLC. But so the Twitter account is a reformed Twitter account from one of Tim's old. Because he tried to launch Subverse before, but it didn't really. It was also called something else. At one point, but it just didn't. He didn't have the resources to hire people or fund more content, and so he just focused on Timcast instead. Because in the last year his channel has done really well. He now has the resources to bring someone on and actually like launch something. So I'm doing most of the business on that end of thing, but Tim is a producer in the way that he's providing resources for content to be produced on Subverse. So we have a lot of exciting projects that we're going to be working on. And
what's your general direction?
So I think we're still narrowing that down, but right now we're really trying to focus on representing things that, I hate saying alternative media because, people kind of connotate with that, with alternative facts and stuff like that. But I do really think there needs to be not a watchdog per se, but somebody to challenge certain narratives that are not necessarily, for example, the James Damore story, like the Google memo being released. And the Knife Media did a great piece on this today, actually. And you see how badly misrepresented it was in the mainstream media because it was catering to a very specific viewpoint. So that was an important story to me, and that's why we went to the James Damore panel, and that's why we did a whole podcast around the James Damore panel at PSU. But I think it's just a matter of representing different viewpoints than what the mainstream is just portraying.
So in a way, I don't want to Kathy Newman you. So what you're saying is you're looking for an interesting nexus where attention is, like an interesting story, and then kind of see where the fall off is, and especially if something's being highly manipulated. Is that where you find yourself attracted?
Yeah, and I think both Tim and I have we both gravitate. I mean, we talk about this stuff all the time. Just about like, did you read this? Oh my God, I can't believe they left this whole thing out, or they skewed it this way. And I think like that's where coverage is going to be important with people going more towards alternative outlets. And I think the thing that's being sacrificed a lot more now is viewpoint diversity. And people a lot of publications will like tout the fact that they have so many diverse employees and all of this stuff, but I feel like they're sacrificing viewpoint diversity and focusing more on gender and race, and it's viewpoint diversity is extremely important to have balanced information and proper coverage of things.
Do you think that there's any sort of correlation between the rise of Antifa and this narrow kind of mass media viewpoint that's going on? Do you see any kind of connection between that or symmetry at all?
Yeah, I would say. I mean,
and even the right side of things too.
I'd say because most of the mainstream media is left leaning. You do see, but I wouldn't say, because I definitely know some people who are on the kind of extreme left who do have a big mistrust of media. And I don't know, like I would say that they do line up, the extreme left will line up more with the mainstream argument, especially on things like Trump and Russia and all of that that chaos. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I think Antifa also has their fair share of alternative media. Maybe not as much as the right, but you're seeing more of it come out.
A lot of blogs and zines. I know they have a lot of zines. I have a box of Antifa zines. So, what's your take on Antifa then? Like, do you think it's going strong? Do you think it's reached its zenith? And
I think this is kind of where this is still something I'm trying to navigate around without being too disruptive with the friends who I have on, because so I know people who will disavow some of the violence that is happening on the Antifa side, but I think part of the problem is it's also glorified, especially with the punch a Nazi thing and like, I don't know, because the Nazi statement is so blanketed now.
Yeah,
it is promoting a certain amount of violence, and it's hard to tell how many people are actually signing up onto it, but I think the fact that you know a lot of Antifa, they have their faces covered, that lets you get away with a lot more. But yeah, I don't know, like I've seen it get pretty bad lately, just at a lot of these free speech events. I mean, I think it kind of started going a lot stronger after J20. J20, a lot of people got arrested. There was a lot of property destroyed, and luckily there was no real violence against other people, but other than what the cops were doing.
Yeah, I'm going to show some ignorance here. What's J20?
Oh, that was during Trump's inauguration in DC.
Yeah.
That's and then a bunch of protesters got arrested. Some journalists as well, and. But yeah, after that, I mean, you had this whole slew of like freedom rallies, free speech rallies, nationalist events, alt-right events. Even at that point, we were still trying to figure out the boundaries of some of these groups.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of where the confusion on the Antifa side comes in, where these groups have fractured a lot more ever since they realized they don't agree on certain things.
Yeah.
Like the alt-right doesn't agree with an ethnic nationalist state. And, you have these kind of rifts happening between these groups. But a lot of the far left activists are kind of ignoring it, and they're still going to blanket them all as the same group. Where I think they'd realize, and I know a lot of my far left friends are going to hate that I say this, but they actually have a lot in common with some of the anarcho-capitalists and the Proud Boys, politically speaking.
Yeah. Kind of libertarian, you're saying, or
what's that?
Pseudo-anarchist, libertarian, or is that what you mean?
It all kind of blends together at a certain point. But the Proud Boys, they're anarcho-capitalists, and I know some anarchists who are far left who actually have a lot in common with them.
Yeah, it's just they have a different style. There's a different surface, but like the operative ideas are basically the same. Is that what you think?
Yeah, like the political systems that they both endorse. Yeah. So it's interesting.
So as you kind of mentioned that like these groups are fracturing, and you said it seemed like you were talking about the right side is kind of fracturing from itself. Do you see that fracturing happening with the extreme left?
Yeah.
Do you think that this intensification that happened last year is leading to this diversification in a way that will necessarily force people to start having more nuanced discussions about things? I
really hope so, but at the same time, like. The fractures on the far left. So at Washington State University, during the Patriot Prayer protests, there was this interesting article going around beforehand that was talking about how the anti-fascists were trying to distance themselves from the democratic socialists, and it was just interesting because usually you see them kind of sticking together because socialism is kind of their thing, but they were like, we don't want to be associated with them. We don't want to be seen with them. Don't wear what they're wearing, And it's like, wow, okay, that's kind of serious that they're fracturing from them. But I don't know.
Do you know why they were not liking each other anymore? Was it?
I can't
playground
remember
politics?
what the article said, and I don't know if I would
Okay.
necessarily believe
Yeah.
what the source says either. But I
Yeah.
feel like it's probably just infighting over stupid things. But
Yeah. Huh.
the fact that they would not stand in solidarity over some, I don't know, I'm guessing trivial political dispute is really interesting. Because even on the fractures on the right, they still stand together most of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of them will try to, I don't know if I can say a lot of them, but I know some of them will still try to like weed out the racists and like the white supremacists and be like, we're not about that. But yeah, I don't know. It's like, you find common ground and you try to stick with that and, work together. But I guess with the fracturing on both sides, they're going to get smaller.
That's just it's fascinating. I don't see that like this radical culture can really survive for too long, because it's just people. It's runs at least last summer, and then from Evergreen through Charlottesville, and then there's something happened in Boston after that. It's just people were not thinking; they were just acting. And I hope like everything calmed down, and it seems like everything's ramping up this week with Sargon and Christina Hoff Sommers, and then there was something else in Michigan, I think, with Richard Spencer. But it seems like things are going again. But like I'm hoping that people like have had some time to digest and think. And
yeah, we'll see. Because I know there's also later this month there's something else planned in Arkansas, but we'll see if that's actually going to happen. But yeah, no, things are just heating up, like we're still in winter, so we'll see what happens. Yeah. But I'm really hoping things do not get as crazy as they did last year. Just because it gets us nowhere, It's like it's so counterproductive.
Yeah.
And I don't know if what they think they're getting, like, other than, I think it was, Charlottesville was about not taking down a statue. Street fighting and people getting hit by a car and a woman dying did not need to happen over a statue. You can say the same things for, the arrests and injuries that happen at these other events. Is it really worth it? Is it like, some people are going to be like, yeah, I don't care, punch a Nazi, or other people are going to be like, I don't care, like, punch those commie scum, but what does that actually achieve?
Yeah. You're going to hurt your fist just as much as that other person's nose. Unless you're using a bike lock, of course, but the same thing.
But yeah, it's crazy. Like, they've gone from, like, even at some of these events, they allow them to bring in shields. And they allow them to bring in, and now they're finally starting to get rid of, like, signposts and other like, pole objects that can be used for bashing people. But it's like, if you show up to an event with a shield, you're obviously expecting something. And a lot of them are like, oh, it's for defense, it's for self-defense. And it's like, you're kind of still asking for trouble, coming prepared for a fight.
Yeah, or some like rotten cabbage being thrown your way.
Yeah, exactly.
So are you guys gonna you guys are gonna work domestically, or do you have any plans to go international anywhere?
I love
Canada doesn't count.
Yeah, I know. We've been in Canada a bit much, and possibly going back later this month, but I don't know. We're really on a limited budget until we get Subverse off the ground. Yeah. And so right now we're really picking and choosing, which stinks because a lot of the stuff we do is really last minute. I honestly never know my schedule more than 2 weeks before I do something.
Okay, right on. So this is a true startup then. Like every week's a new start.
Yeah, exactly. So I've the last time I went abroad to cover something was, I think, the Catalonian. It was after they had their referendum in October. Yeah. Oh wait, no, that's not true. I went to Iceland after that, but I don't know. It's hard to choose. Like, it's hard to choose what to cover, because especially internationally, because costs can get so big, and a lot of times you'll need a fixer. But we're gonna be working on it. I love covering things abroad, because I feel like as Americans we get so stuck in our bubble sometimes, and we feel so important to ourselves, and it's really important to kind of to bring us back out to a worldly perspective. And things like the election in Italy are really important to be paying attention to, because I feel like European trends are something we should be watching, just because in a way it's going to affect us, whether it's just like the attitudes people are taking towards certain political parties and the results of the election. So yeah, it's something that I'm always paying attention to as to the best of my ability, but it's also something I want to bring kind of more exposure to from our audience.
Yeah, when you're able to. I have one more question, and this question was originally for Tim, but I think you can answer it, not on his behalf, but I was at the James Damore, Heather Hying, Brett Weinstein, and Heather Pluckrose talk in Portland at PSU. And there was that one little tiny incident when somebody like ripped out the cord and they shouted something really inane. But what I saw, I looked and I watched what was going on, and then I looked back to you and Tim. You guys were in the corner, and Tim was already gone.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, like, when something like that happens, do you run right toward the drama? Is that what you find yourself doing?
Yep, that's part of the job, I guess. It's funny because I looked at him hoping that he was going to do that, because I had that whole like camera thing set up, and I was like, oh God, I want to go out there. But no, I'm glad he did, because what happened on the outside, which I'm sure you saw the video of what happened on the outside, that was pretty nuts. But no, that's kind of always been the thing, and that's where you get the best footage too. Like even in Ferguson, it's funny, I was working with some other freelancers at the time, and I remember there was reports of gunshots, and so we all jump in the car and we start going towards the gunshots. And within a minute or so, we get pulled over. There's like a police helicopter above us, and there's a bunch of police cars on the side.
Really?
And they pull us over because they think we're the suspect who did the shooting, because we're driving like really fast towards the area. And they pull us over. They're like, show us your hands. And we're like, we're journalists, it's fine. And then they're like, why are you going towards the gunshots? You're supposed to be going away from the gunshots. And it's like, that's what we do. You know?
Well, how do you control your emotions? Like when somebody's yelling or when somebody's shooting and stuff like that? Like, have you gotten used to that, or are you not even really bothered by that?
Yeah, to a certain extent, you get desensitized to it. Like, especially at some of these street fights that happen at these like free speech and freedom events that happen. You get in the middle of fighting and you get injured sometimes. Like even in Washington State, you can see at the very beginning of the podcast, the footage that we use as the opener. I get rammed by a bike cop real hard, and I had a huge welt on my arm for like 2 weeks.
Okay.
But yeah, you get injured in a lot of these things, and I'm lucky. Like I usually wear a helmet at some of the events, just because you never know when somebody's gonna miss their target and hit you in the head with a glass bottle. And it's
next
good
thing you know, you'll have a shield.
Yeah, exactly. And you got to be prepared for, like, I always have a first aid kit. I always have a gas mask, and it's you kind of almost have to prepare for the worst at some of these things. And people will make fun of you, like, why do you have a helmet? And it's like, oh, you just wait, buddy. You'll be wishing you had a helmet and a gas mask in a second.
So your nerves are pretty calm then when you're running into this stuff. I mean, I'm sure there's adrenaline and stuff, but you're not.
Oh yeah, the adrenaline definitely hits. But yeah, I guess I've been doing this long enough where I still am like, your head is on a swivel the whole time, and it's like part of the adrenaline. You're like hyper aware. And I feel like that's just me in general. I'm a very observational person, and my head is almost always on a swivel, because you never know. But you do get desensitized to it after a while. Like I see people like cracking each other over the head with poles and bottles, and people coming out all bloodied up and injured, and you're like, fuck, this is messed up. But yeah, it's you just got to keep holding the camera. You just got to keep doing what you're doing, especially in Charlottesville, after that car ran into all those people, or I should say James Field drove that car into a bunch of people. You come up to the scene afterward, and you see the aftermath, and you see all these people like horribly injured, and you're like, holy shit, like, what am I supposed to do right now? And on the one hand, you kind of go around, you're making sure people are okay, and then when the ambulances and everything show up, then you start getting back to work and like filming what's going on, or taking photos. But yeah, it's not something I wanted to get used to either, and it's kind of weird now to me, seeing it almost on a regular basis.
Okay. Really?
Yeah.
Well, so does that kind of make you jaded towards humanity because you're constantly running towards the worst problems and stuff? Or
I feel like for some people it does get it has jading qualities. I don't know if I'm just naive or an optimist, but I think there's still hope for people to get, whether it's like they get so stressed out about what's going on, they're like, you know, we need to go back to sanity. Like, this is ridiculous. How did we get this? How did we get this far gone? I still have hope that, like, I was talking to Tim about this the other day, the political event horizon, where, you know, at what point are you past the point of no return and getting sucked off the waterfall? And this is where I think he and I disagree. I don't think we're too far gone. I think there's still hope left, and I don't know if that's just within the next generation or what, but you know, you see, I think, you know, it's a relative thing. I think we're going to see people who get used to the madness and then are like, you know, we need to do something about this because this isn't normal. Or, you know, you have the opposite where it's like, well, this is what's supposed to be happening. You're supposed to have a super divided group of people going at each other all the time. But I don't think that's what people want. I think humans are naturally harmonious people. But they fall into these groups where they're like, well, I think this is the best way to be a harmonious people. No, I think this is the best way to be harmonious people. Well, we should fight about that.
Maybe that will result in harmony eventually. Maybe like that.
Hey, when we're all dead, yeah, it'll be super harmonious.
Well, that's excellent. Thanks for letting me chat with you. And
yeah, no, it's fun.
Do you guys have another video coming out soon on Subverse or?
So we're talking about that. We're actually kind of branching out to collaborations with other groups.
Oh, sweet.
And so we're trying to figure out kind of a format because we want to have like a regular show on Subverse.
Oh, like a panel, like discussion kind of thing? Is that what you mean by show?
Yeah,
or?
we're trying to figure it out because for one thing, my background is in animation as well as filmmaking. So I love explainer videos, and I think it's a really effective way of breaking down complex topics or issues to people. And so I've been talking to a couple people about collaborating on some explainer videos because it's easier when you have more people to be working on something, especially if you want to make it a regular thing because it takes a long, and I'm sure you know from putting your own content up, it takes a while to work on things, and even then you're never going to get it perfect. It was funny because like even on this documentary, I know I fucked up or I screwed up at one point because I used the same audio twice apparently.
Oh yeah. I saw that criticism. That was one of my regular commenters. Like.
I like that guy. I think I don't know him obviously, but I liked the content that he put up because that was really helpful in my research. But I appreciated him making that comment. But yeah, no, I mean, in a production pipeline, especially for like documentaries and stuff, you have more than one pair of eyes on it. Yeah, absolutely. So my second pair of eyes was Tim, and I was like, hey, can you watch this to make sure I didn't screw up any of the editing because I've been staring at it for weeks. Yeah. And so he watches it. He's like, oh, it's fine, you know. It's like, oh, great, okay, so I can put it up online now and
publish.
I won't have to worry about it. But no, apparently he skipped through some parts, and so therefore did not catch it. So
yeah, you can always use that janky YouTube editing feature.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, I'm still not that familiar with YouTube, and this has been very new to me, and I'm really liking it so far, though.
Is the explainer video like the ones with like the hand drawing all the things while somebody's talking? Is that what you mean by that?
That's one way of doing it. And then so one of the people I've been talking to, they're based in Canada, and they do more kind of like international things, and mostly Middle East and they do some good like chalkboard kind of stuff. But I really like the motion graphics ones that are kind of more succinct and, you know, a little more flashy. They keep your attention pretty well because it's always something going on and moving on to the next thing.
Would you be explaining like events or concepts, or like what would you want to be explaining then?
I don't know. Well, I mean, I think that's what we're trying to figure out, because I basically said, send me a pitch and we'll break it down. We'll see if it's worth doing it in a motion graphic kind of style. Okay. And I don't really care if it can be anything from a concept to something that just happened to, it could be anything, as long as, if it's too hard to do with actual footage, but explain it in a way with graphics that'll help people digest it. Yeah.
Well, if you ever need some voiceover work, keep me in mind. I can.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I'll lay down some tracks.
Yeah, I feel like people are gonna get sick of our voices pretty quickly, so it'll be good to have some more options.
Yeah, you guys have nice voices. Tim's got that buttery. Well, it's more of a butterscotch voice. But...
Butterscotch, yeah. That's a good way of explaining it.
Well, cool,
awesome.
Emily. Well, have adventures with your helmet. Do you have your helmet on so we could see it? I guess you don't want to be identified.
No, it's fine. It's in the other room. I'm actually going to upgrade my helmet soon because I've had this helmet since, I think, 2014, 2015.
Oh, wow. So it's got
great.
Number
but
of cracks
it's
in
real
it.
stuffed up.
Yeah.
Like it's been through a lot, and I think I'm gonna upgrade to a climbing helmet, and it's a lot lighter and covers more of the back of your head in case somebody wants.
How do you choose your colors in this day and age to remain neutral?
That's actually a really good question, because I've talked to other journalists about this. You show up to these events and certain factions have their wardrobes, like whether it's the khaki pants and white polos or the all black, or different factions have different wardrobes. So you kind of have to find like a happy balance. Not too much black, not a polo.
Even your wardrobe. Oh yeah.
Yeah. But also you got to keep in mind, like, okay, like how long are you going to be outside? What's the climate? Are you going to get overheated? And then I don't know. There's so many factors you have to take, and I feel like I do a pretty good job of preparing for the elements. I'm from Chicago, so I'm used to being really cold. So I don't know. I have the things that I wear usually have lots of pockets, so I can keep batteries and.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It's
Cliff bars and nuts.
Bars, exactly. Yeah.
Candy for the kids and stuff like that.
Yeah. No, it's funny because among the freelancers, you share food a lot. So I always make sure I have extra bars on me.
Oh, interesting. Somebody should do a documentary about the freelance industry.
Oh man, that would be great, because we go through some shit, and then at the end of the day, when we're filing our footage and our photos, we're all basically drinking and and it's a lot of fun. It's definitely a lifestyle, though. It's not something you can just do casually. Like for me, it started out as a hobby I don't even want to call it a hobby. It was kind of like a side job while I was going to school, and then it kind of took over my life, so I dropped out of school and did it. But yeah, it's definitely a lifestyle choice.
Wow. Well, cool, Emily. Thanks for chatting.
Yeah, thanks. This is great. Yeah, this was. I'm sure your folks are gonna enjoy the documentary if they feel like checking it out.
Yeah, that'll be in the description, and I'm gonna think of a very clickbaity title, like edgy media journalist on the front lines or something like that. I'll talk with my co-producer.
Well, I can give you an edgy quote if you just want to put it in quotations.
Oh, do you have a soundbite for me?
I don't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but
I'll just paste that together if I think of something later on.
Okay. Yeah, cool. And you can edit this whole video so it sounds like I'm saying something really controversial.
Yeah, I have a program that'll just let me manipulate your face however I want, so it's pretty good. Awesome. All right, cool.
Cool. Well, yeah, tip me off if you ever have something in the area in Olympia that's going down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'll keep in touch with you guys and see how you develop. I'm really excited to see where your project's going.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm excited too. It's kind of daunting in a way, but very exciting.
It's just an LLC, right? So
yeah.
It's limited liability. It's not like
right. No, we can dissolve it whenever we want.
Walk away at any time.
Exactly.
Right. Well, you have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Thanks again. This was awesome.
Yeah, definitely. Ciao.
Yeah. Awesome. Bye.